Hello everyone and welcome to this panel discussion. We're looking at the impact of COVID on the diagnostics laboratory sector internationally. This is one of a number of a series of digital events we're running in the run-up to HBI 2020, the global conference which takes place in December in London. So welcome. We're going to do a 55-minute panel discussion based upon your questions. And after that, I'm going to ask my chief executive here at HBI, Julian Turner, to talk a little bit about a new digital initiative we're about to launch to allow global networking and global communities in the healthcare services space. We've got three great panelists today. I'm pleased to be joined by Jos Lammers, who's the executive chairman of Unilabs, the Pan-EMEA Imaging and Lab Group. By Wolf Coupat. Wolf runs Amadis, the big German-Belgian lab group, and also by Peter Bristow. Peter is the chief executive of a company called Rapid Pandemic Response. I don't think I really need to say any more about Unilabs and Amadis. I think the audience here knows exactly who they are. Let me just say a few quick words about RPR. It was set up in March, and essentially it is an integrator which enables, through using IT and IT workflow, to bring in spare lab capacity and to work with service providers to provide better solutions initially for COVID. And so it's recently won a large contract with Luxembourg to do COVID testing, for instance. And Peter describes himself as a disruptor, I'm glad to say. It's always good to have at least one disruptor on the panel, although I expect, in fact, that Wolf and Jos would also describe themselves as disruptors if I let them. This is very much based on your question and answers, and you should see a Q&A panel on your screen, which shows you the questions and answers. We've selected some already, but please add more and comment. And use chat to introduce yourselves to each other. I won't be looking at chat myself, so anything you write in chat, I won't see. So if you put questions in Q&A. The next session we're planned is on June the 10th at 2 p.m. UK time, and that's with Angela Spartaro, who's a partner at McKinsey, and McKinsey's done a lot of work across Europe on how countries are responding to digital health. So you've got the beginnings of a new landscape as countries move very strongly towards using digital health in many areas of healthcare, and she's kind of talking about that and what strategies they're following and getting across that landscape. So that will be a really interesting session, I'm sure. What else? Oh yes, we're new to this game, so we've got an online survey. And it takes about 2 minutes to fill in, and we'd really appreciate your feedback because it's the only way we're actually going to learn to do this better, and we want to do it better. So I think let's go straight to our first question then, and get straight into the meat of the discussion, shall we? So the first question is really, how has routine testing been impacted by lockdown measures across your different countries of operation? And that's from Carl Reiner at Preventers Capital Management. So perhaps you, Jos, are obviously in many different countries, aren't you? So, I mean, we heard lockdown was leading to a 50% drop in volume as elective really fell off a cliff. Is that your experience? What's happened?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Max, for the invite, and welcome also on my behalf to all panelists. I hope you're, and participants, 140 in total now in the meantime, I see more or less. I hope everybody's sound and safe. As you can see, I'm still working from my home setting, which suggests already that the response to COVID is fairly country dependent. I'm based in the Netherlands, or at least the family is. My office is in Geneva, but I haven't been there for quite a while now. And what we basically see, Max, is yes, in some countries, volume drops have been indeed steeper than 50%. In other countries, they have been less steep. Interestingly enough, also some differences between laboratory, radiology, and pathology. Pathology is more affected even than laboratory and radiology in general. We have just published our Q1 results. I cannot comment too much about our Q2, but in Q1 we were 3% down on revenues, Q1 this calendar year, where up till the end of Feb, our organic revenue growth was 5+% up. So the impact really started in March. And clearly April was a poor month. What we see in May, however, is a gradual and steady increase in testing volumes across all our different subspecialties on a week-by-week basis. And we see currently even some countries are above the volumes of last year in, for example, this specific week.
Oh, really? Above the volumes of last year? So above revenue on last year then, if they're above?
Yeah, I should say revenue, because it's good you clarified this. Thanks for that, Max, because the volume drop was 50%. But a lot of the tests were lower priced as well. The more routine tests, where more specialty tests were still relatively speaking okay. So the revenue drop is not as steep as the volume drop in general.
If the volume drop was 50%, can you just say roughly what the revenue drop was? Are we talking 30%, 40%, or?
Well, I cannot comment too much. We have just published our Q1 results, but as I shared in Jan and Feb, our results were 5% up, and in March, the overall quarter was around 3% down on an organic like-for-like basis.
Okay.
And that impact really happened in the last 2 weeks. April was more affected, and since May we see to start first slow, but I think a bit of an accelerating good and better pictures.
Right. Okay. So it's improving, and different countries were affected particularly badly in lockdown, were they? I mean.
Yeah, especially the countries where there were very strict lockdown procedures, especially in the south of Europe, where governments, for example, in Spain, we all know, had very a bad number of cases. They had to react locally very strongly, very stringent measures, very much police controlled. And as a result, most of the GP visits stopped for non-urgent procedures. Only COVID-related urgent procedures, oncology, that kind of stuff tended to continue. But in effect, you know, the underlying diseases, disorders have not gone. So we do expect a catch-up demand. I'm sure we'll talk about it later on as well.
Okay, fine. And Wolf, what about you? You're looking at Belgium and Germany, aren't you? What was the impact there?
Oh yeah. First of all, hello and good afternoon, everyone. And Max, thanks for inviting me to this panel. Basically, the Amidas group is following the same pattern we've just heard from Jos. Obviously, there's a difference. Belgium follows a stricter dynamic as in France. We had an earlier impact on our volumes in the lab. We had a stronger decline, stronger lockdown. Germany actually joined rather late when you look at the European landscape. And the impact in Germany was far less pronounced than in other countries. We had the first drop in end of March. April was a relatively weak month, but not to the tune of 40 or 50% minus, more in the 10 to 20% bracket. And now May is coming back. And as Joost just said, in some areas, we see volume numbers above last year. And obviously for the Amidas group, we have a very diversified business model. We have some areas where we never closed. We never closed any doctor's office. We never closed any lab, even in the prime days of the pandemic development. And now there's some pent-up demand, and we see May, the month of May, has been very strong. Obviously, we don't have the final numbers yet, but we are crawling back pretty much to pre-pandemic levels. And here on that slide, hopefully everybody can see that. You see the blue line on the upper part of the slide is how we ramped up the testing capacity for COVID, PCR tests. Everything started basically in Germany in week 12, mid-March, and we at the Amidas Group, same as the industry, our colleagues in other labs, we increased capacity very rapidly. But you see in the blue bars, after late March, the demand for PCR capacity has been quite stable, with a number of positive testing dropping from 12% in the end of March, early April timeframe to now, basically last week, we only found 1 to 1.5% positive COVID PCR tests in all our labs. So that tells you that the first wave, we don't know about the second, but the first wave in Germany is basically through, and we are very stable. Capacity is there, but not being fully used, as you can see from the slide.
So all of this COVID testing, I mean, can you say what kind of percentage of your revenue then was coming from this new COVID stream of work, which you weren't doing before?
We were actually in a very good position in Amidas, because we could start the PCR testing very quickly. Remember, the PCR test most of us are using now across Europe has been validated by the University Hospital of Berlin, the Charité, and we had very early access, so we could ramp up capacity very quickly. For the Amidas Group, from all our lab volumes, to your question, Max, all our lab volumes in the month of May and April, my estimate is that around 10 to 15% comes from COVID, basically covering the gaps from routine testing very nicely.
Right. Okay. Fine. So so May looks like a good month for you. Okay. Fine.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Peter, have you got any general comments on lockdown and recovery from lockdown, or?
I think the gentlemen know better what the impact on the routine lab was. I mean, what I think we see across different countries is that the lab activity is obviously also a function of, let's say, general healthcare activity, only in parts compensated, as Wolf just said, by the additional COVID testing. Right? But I mean, the US are already back to about minus 15% on surgical activity, a kind of minus versus pre-crisis. So I'd expect that the routine lab demand there kind of follows suit very rapidly.
Right. Yes. Okay. So yes. So okay. So it's been slightly less deep than people might have thought, and the curve out of it is accelerating. Jos, is that right? I remember when we talked a few weeks ago, you were saying that you were seeing a very slow but steady recovery in every country, and that recovery is accelerating. Is that right?
Yeah, it seems to accelerate over the last few weeks. In our bondholder call for our public bondholders last week, I also shared that for our industry and our business specifically, I do think we will see a V-shaped recovery, not necessarily for the wider economy, don't get me wrong, but for our business. And I think the logic and the underlying logic and rationale is that disorders, diseases have not gone. People were just scared to go to their GP or to a hospital. But the complaints and the underlying disorders are still there. So we do expect a catch-up demand. That is going to happen. We do expect waiting lists in hospitals, for example, in the time to come. As we have seen with the hairdressers in companies where they opened up again. So, you know.
You mean that the second half of the third quarter and the fourth quarter should be business as normal, and probably we'll see a bit of whack-a-mole with increased demand.
Yeah, so that's always with the necessary caution, I would say. That's clearly what we hope for. We're trading much better than our worst case scenario from a revenue perspective, an EBITDA perspective, and a cash perspective as well. The big unknown is how big will be that second wave. If what we all hope is not going to happen. There will be a mutation to the virus. That can be bad. That's what happened in the previous big pandemics as well. But let's not hope and let's not expect that. But if things continue to develop as they do currently, I think we should be looking at a much better second half of the year than we have seen, especially in the second half of March, April, with the start of a recovery in May indeed.
Right. Okay, fine. So I'm leaning over because I'm trying to see who's voting for which questions, there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of voting taking place. It's very hard to read, actually. Why don't we go on to the more general question then of really how you think COVID is going to change the healthcare industry? Let me come to you, Peter, as somebody who's relatively new to diagnostics. I mean, you were saying that you saw several ways in which you thought it would radically change things.
Yeah.
Why don't we just go through those and then see what Jos and Wolf say about those?
Yeah. So I think for me the COVID crisis, or let's call it COVID opportunity. I think it opens a few new directions for diagnostics, and let's see how far they last or long they last, right? I think for me they come along the chain, the say diagnostics value chain. Then there's a technology rethinking, maybe, or people are just exploring the far out opportunities that previously nobody looked at. And I think there's a big theme that is consumerization and the new interaction with patients. Let me quickly say what I mean by those. So if we talk about the chain, right, you have new people ordering tests in substantial volumes, right? So beyond the routine testing, you have, well, in some cases, consumers asking directly. You have a lot of the authorities actually asking for testing. You're now seeing airlines or immigration to ask for testing. So you essentially have new prescribers, if you want to use kind of the old world terminology to that. At the same moment, you see new senders, yeah, of samples, right? So all of these testing stations, for example, that have been put up, or kind of airport-based sampling stations. I don't know. I think the first one that went public, at least PR-wise, was in Vienna, right? So it's like new places where people take samples that then get sent. So you have a new group of that. I'm not so sure how permanent that is, to be honest. But one thing that is also interesting, you have a lot of people at the lab end, new entrants beyond the traditional lab chains, right? So you have, I think the most visible one in Germany was probably Centogene, that previously focused on rare diseases and became one of the biggest COVID testers, kind of ran the entire statewide campaign for Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in the Northeast. Or you have veterinary labs coming in. You have clinical trial labs that were tasked by the government of Belgium to ramp up the kind of bulk capacity. Or you have new geographical interests. Middle East, which has traditionally been a very, let's say, profitable playing ground for established companies, has seen a massive inflow of, let's say, Chinese push from BGI out of Shenzhen that essentially ramped up capacity there in Dubai, and that won big government contracts. So along the entire chain, you have new players popping up.
That company called again that won the
BGI. They're based at BGI. They're out of Shenzhen, and they just won this.
BG. Okay.
They're pitching that they can do very quick, let's say, PCR lab installation. They're ramping up the Saudi volume, for example, to I think about 65,000 a day at the moment. So you have those new entrants along the chain, and some of those, at least those that made investments, I'm quite sure they have a plan to stay in one way or another, and are going to challenge the incumbents. It's Beijing Genomics Institute actually is the BGI name. The other thing, when I said technology application, I think people are rethinking some of the technologies. I'll give you some examples. I mean, GSK has just made a big bet on CRISPR as a diagnostic method with their co-investment with Mammoth in the US. I think there have been publications already back in March by the Weizmann Institute in Israel that used next generation sequencing for COVID testing. Now that in itself is not unusual. You can of course do that, but NGS has traditionally been more of a case-by-case type of analysis, and they put I think about 400 or so on a robot plate. So people started to automate, let's say, testing methodologies that could be a complete game changer. Yeah? I mean, if that picked up pace, which it hasn't, and I'm not sufficiently technically skilled to tell you why, but if that picks up pace, that makes PCR obsolete because it's cheaper, it's faster, it's more precise. Yeah. So I think people are just rethinking technological options in this context. And then
what you're really saying is, I think, three things, isn't it? You're saying we're seeing new clients, new entrants, and the adoption of new technology.
Yeah, it's fair. Can I just one more, if you allow me, one more sentence? I think consumers are also taking a different role, and I think there's an opportunity and a challenge at the same time for the diagnostics sector. Yeah,
the consumer also becomes a new client or changes. They're no longer the third.
Absolutely.
You're no longer 3 or 4 places away from the consumer. You could be much closer to the consumer.
Yeah. I had a YouTube. I was watching football that luckily resumed in Germany. I had an app popping up for a company called Sarah Screen that probably few of us have heard before, say in the general population. Now everybody sees them selling self-test antibodies, right? I mean, people start doing finger pricks at home the way in the past it was limited to diabetics, right? And now people are testing themselves for antibodies. But that's the right thing or not, but it's happening. Sorry, if your question is how that company is called, there are many of them. You have Like Us, you have Sarah Screen, and I'm very sure that in different countries, different companies are trying to go into that market. You had MedBell in the UK selling self-tests, etc. So the consumers are just taking a more active role and also demanding more testing. Like there's just more awareness of preventative testing as well.
So new technology, new entrants, new clients. Does this scare you, Jos?
No, we embrace it, frankly, because we believe this is very good for the diagnostic industry in general. For example, if in the past we tried to organize some publicity around our company, there was relatively little traction. And now our local leaders are asked for interviews at front pages of the national newspapers on a very regular basis. It really puts the diagnostic industry in a different perspective. Our local CEOs are meeting on a regular basis, for example, either the Minister of Healthcare or even the Prime Minister in certain countries. So in addition to what Peter said, what I think will also happen moving forward, there might potentially be a different view on how private labs can actually help the public sector. I think we have seen that in some countries, one of the benefits of being in the almost 20 countries we are now in is that we see the differences and we can benchmark. And we've seen that some countries have been forward-leaning and really embracing the potential to help in this crisis, also for private labs. Other countries have been much more reluctant. However, the countries that have been much more reluctant now realize that they need a private diagnostic space as well to simply get the work done. And the public systems are not often that quick or not that organized. And that is really where we can help, also in access to equipment, given our size, for example. So we really see that we are seen in a different and more positive light also from the public sector, where we are forced through the crisis to work together. And generally that has been a very positive experience for everybody.
Right. We have another question on that later, but I mean, in terms of the new technology or the new entrants, I mean, isn't there a danger when you've got people like BGI coming into the Gulf or big Chinese operators moving into the sector that this could eventually lead to an undercutting? I mean, because I hear some insurers are already asking for discounts on tests because they see that. Yeah,
but that has been a thing that has been there forever. So the way we look at it, and also I personally look at it, the European diagnostics market, this includes lab, radiology, pathology, has a size of about 100 billion euros.
Yes.
And is growing low single digit on an annual basis. Now, we have an opportunity here, and the consolidation in our space is still very, very limited. So new entrants means more dynamics, more possibilities, more interest in the sector. So no, we're not at all scared. I think this crisis, I think something good will come out of it. Clearly, nobody was hoping for a healthcare crisis as big as this. Nobody was hoping for an economic crisis that I think we're still starting to see. Specifically for our sector, I do believe that there will be a V-shape where we see the start of the recovery already. And we can get better out of this crisis than going into it before, for many reasons.
Fine. Okay. And Wolf, any?
Yeah, very good discussion. Very good discussion. I think what Peter described about the new entrants, the new providers, new channels, and new customer demand, also through the internet and everything. That's all. I mean, we welcome competition. I think competition helps to sharpen our capabilities and to channel investments into the right direction. There is something even more fundamental. I think first of all, the new interest or the revival of virology and microbiology as a specialty, as a medical specialty, it's been a little bit out of the focus because in recent years, genetics, new generation sequencing, everything has taken the forefront. But virology up to very recently seemed to be a bit boring. But now with the pandemic, the public interest, the interest of governments and healthcare decision makers has become much stronger. So this will obviously help us a lot to really interact with governments and decision makers, and also address public medical needs. One thing for me, with all these new entrants and technology, one thing is very clear: medicine cannot happen, and certainly not in a sustainable way, without the physicians, the medical profession. That's why we, as a network of highly specialized physicians, we are not scared at all. We want to interact, we want to collaborate, we want to provide our services. But I think it also tells us all the other entrants, public health services and genetics institutions and so on, can only go so far. At the end of the day, as a patient or a person looking for advice, you always need the physician. You need the doctor. You need somebody to make sense out of all the data. We can, in our labs, and anybody else can do that as well, we can produce a result. But what does it actually mean? I mean, we had all these antibody discussions. Is it safe? Does it confirm immunity? How long will that be? Can I go any place now? And so on. All this discussion, at the end of the day, you need a specialist, somebody experienced, to tell you what to make of it. Therefore, no risk to our traditional business model of having healthcare specialist physicians available.
Peter, what do you think of that? Because I mean, at the end of the day, I suppose consumers, if you were saying consumers wanted a more direct relationship with lab tests, and so this, I mean, the idea that it all has to go through a physician, of course, rather stands in the way of that, or not.
So I wanted to respond and let's say mildly challenge Wolf on what he said. Anyways, I mean, I think there's an evolving relationship and an evolving role for the physician. Yeah. And consumers are being more informed. I mean, if you go back to the 50s, physicians questioned or actually refused the idea of informing patients that they had cancer because there was nothing to do and it would just worry them. Yeah. And that's, you know, that's a few decades ago, right? So I think in a time of, let's say, accelerated change, I think consumers have a chance, and some of them at least, a will to take on, how should I say, more active roles or more informed roles, etc. So I'll give you an example. Yeah? A lot of people actually ask for virus testing. I'd love to visit my grandma who's in a retirement home, etc. I'd love to be clean before I go there, right? I mean, it's probably something that you've all heard a million times over the last few weeks, right? So frankly, they may be right or wrong, and it's not precise, and they don't exactly understand the risk stratification that the clean PCR gives you. But by and large, they're going to make that decision without a physician. They're going to get a test, and that test reduces the risk of what's happening. And there's still, remaining risk, etc. But it's going to happen, right? Or it's actually happening. Yeah. So I think there's a component of consumerism already kind of on the go, and I think it's a great opportunity. If you think beyond COVID, which is an obvious killer, I mean, we're despite the it's just a flu voices. I mean, today in Germany we stand at 4.5% mortality or 4% something. I mean, even in a country that fames itself with all the ICU capacity. But I think even for other more common ailments or infections, I could see in the future that in the peak season of influenza, retirement homes will require a rapid test on entry and tell you to wait for 15 minutes until you go see grandma, right? So I think there's going to be a part of the market that doesn't necessarily require, let's say, physician input on the kind of along that chain. That's not going to be the big part of the market, don't get me wrong, but I think there's an element coming, right?
A part of the market. Yeah, I suppose it depends on the price, doesn't it? Yes. We're getting a question which is being voted up here, so we should go to it because people want to vote up things, which is good. And really, they're asking. Marianne Morini is asking. COVID-19 was a good example where labs need to introduce new tests into their catalog. Some of them coming from innovative startup companies. Is it a strategic focus for the labs in the coming years? What is the process for a company with a new test to have it performed in Unilabs or Amedis labs? Jos, that's a very specific question.
Yeah, let me try to answer that shortly. And then I can maybe also take the M&A question, if that makes sense. That was also voted up, Max. So for new tests, we're always open to discuss that. We have a specific department for that. We try to do tests in-house, but we recognize that startups might have great ideas. And being a pan-European player, we can provide a European platform for developing new tests. So if there's any specific ideas, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'll happily guide those persons within our organization. Specifically on M&A, I think that's also an opportunity that will evolve. I think there's a question also, how will the M&A space and pricing evolve in the long term? Is this a good time to buy or rather to sell? I think you hosted a conference or a similar chat not too long ago with a couple of M&A specialists, which I think Max all shared, that they believe the M&A space will be very attractive and active again, although with a couple of remarks which I'd like to share as well. I do think that this crisis has shown potentially to maybe family-owned laboratory or diagnostic companies that this kind of thing can be scary, and it might be helpful to be part of a bigger group. So I would not be surprised if many, let's say, lab groups, family-owned, that have not a great succession plan or that have been scared through the COVID crisis are in a position to say, yeah, let's further think and see what we can do here as well. Given the development of volumes and revenues in specific companies, pricing will be sensitive. I think the common thinking is that there will be many more deals which an earn out if they're done now, so that people do get a certain part up front, but also partially get paid by a component based on recovery of the acquisition target over time. So that would be my thing, but generally I do believe the sector will come out of this much stronger, and especially the consolidators that have an opportunity to further build, while there's plenty of organic growth opportunities, and there might be great opportunities for startups that have something unique to offer as well.
Are you being approached more by people who want to sell at the moment?
Well, we start to see that. We fully reactivated our M&A team. They were on furlough, but we do see a lot of interest, and people want to talk now.
Okay, Fine. Wolf, what about you? If I've got some innovative new test, I mean, how I don't know how. Historically, it's been really hard to get innovative new tests into the larger labs, hasn't it?
It all, yeah, agreed. It's a complex question, and it all depends on two things. Number one, you need to have people in your organization. Joost just mentioned Unilabs have that. We have that at Amidas as well. We traditionally enjoy a great collaboration with academia, with university hospitals and labs. You need to have people who have the scientific competency to really go deep into the details. Is it worthwhile pursuing a certain route or not? You need these decision making in-house in order to be able to detect opportunities early on, and we have lots of scientifically very competent people on board, and we love to engage in this kind of discussions. So best way is always to approach the CEO or anybody well known as a scientist, and then take it from there. The complicated thing about the new tests, and this obviously may be a little bit different in Germany than in other geographies, it always depends on reimbursement. You can have the brightest idea, and we have some experience, just speaking of liquid biopsy, for example. We can have the brightest idea, the wonderful test, great academic results, great articles in Nature and Science, everything there. But if the government or the healthcare system doesn't pay for that, your opportunity, your business opportunity is very limited. So you need to have people who can engage with the reimbursement decision makers at the government level to talk about the need to get reimbursement for these innovations. And this can take quite a bit of time, but now with COVID, and this is actually another element, remember the discussion of the vaccination. People always now at political level talk about how can we shorten the approval processes? How can we take bureaucracy out of the system? Because now there is a sense of urgency, and I am very hopeful that this discussion with COVID will actually sharpen our views and sharpen our approach to really go for the value and the benefit of having these things approved and reimbursed, rather than having a decade of debate and finally getting nowhere. So actually COVID will help us to have better discussions with healthcare decision makers. I will comment on M&A a bit later, unless you want me to, but I don't want to take too much of time here.
Go on.
Can I?
Yeah.
Max, can I respond to 2 points that Wolf and Joost just made very quickly? And Wolf, I'm very happy you mentioned the regulatory process. I think this is not only for the lab, and I think we're seeing Europe move a bit. Yeah, I mean the FDA, I think, had a very different approach, and essentially just, I'm going to say, allowing everything, yeah, on very tiny bits and pieces of data, and then pulling back all types of tests. I think it was 50 antibody tests or so that they pulled back from the market a week ago, and then Abbott had a big bang on their "I'm available rapidly and everywhere" to its 58% sensitive only kind of exercise, only 2-3 weeks ago, on their, what's it called? I'm blanking on the name. Abbott One something. I think most of you have probably heard the story. Yeah. So the Europeans are still more conservative on the regulatory side. But think about the whole testing and tracing. I'm not talking about tracing and tracking, I'm not talking about lab tests, but about the kind of tracking where you are type of discussions. And I think even there, people are becoming flexible, right? I mean, the first time that, broader population actually looks to China to learn something, and not only looks down on them, kind of, being the bench for production, but actually coming up with ideas that work. Yeah. And I think one thing that kind of came to my mind, where politicians start to be flexible. I saw a statement from the Green Party in Germany, which is, to say, traditionally not one that is, the first one to say let's have data track for everyone, but they suggested why don't we allow it now, but clearly make a law before we enact that, that we make a law that says at the end of COVID, we'll switch it off again, right? So I think politics are becoming creative, and I would hope that we also see that in the way how healthcare is being funded, how it's regulated, etc.
Okay, fine. Well, let's go on to the next. Well, we've got a couple of other questions. I mean, I think what a question here about what are the ways that the public and private sector could have or should have better collaborated, and what changes will we see going forwards? From Renan Baruch at Stonepine Capital in the UAE. So yes, so looking at how the public and private sectors have cooperated. Jos, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, so specifically in the Middle East, and then I'll comment on Europe in more detail. We have seen a very constructive relationship between our local lab that does a lot of testing locally, the only privately allowed lab that does very extensive testing as well for COVID, the PCR testing at this point in time. It's a bit dependent on country by country, as I shared before. Some countries have been forward-leaning, realized early on they really had to embrace the potential of the private sector as well to get basically the test done. Other countries have been more restrictive in who they want to test, and firmly felt initially that it's the public institutions and the public diagnostic centers that should do the testing.
Is that principally a divide between NHS countries, like Germany, which is statutory insured?
Yeah, but it's not about the insurance, but in some countries, they saw this as a pandemic that needed to be controlled by the public authorities, if you like. But in the meantime, realized that the capacity and the speed they need is very much supported by the private diagnostic sector as well. So we basically see quite massive amounts of testing going on already across our regions. As I shared in our Q1 results, we have done up till the end of May around 530,000 PCR tests already. And the volume of antibody tests is ramping up quickly as well now, which we have available in all countries. There's still a couple of question marks about it. So we're very selective in what we offer. And we have a specific scientific committee that really looks at what makes sense and what does not make sense, specifically for the antibody testing. And there's still a number of question marks around it, but there's also good supply, and we have, with more than 1,000 doctors on payroll, you can imagine the wealth of quality we have in our team from a scientific experience, and everybody is happy to contribute. So I think we're in a good spot, and the industry and we as a company will get out of this crisis, I do believe, better than going into it before.
What does that mean? I think that means more outsourcing from big hospitals of routine tests in future, or I mean, what does that actually look? What does that actually mean in terms of?
Yeah, so like you talked before, new customers, for example, new customer groups that we have not been in touch with before, more openness to talk public and private. But also from a cost perspective. We have seen that in a number of countries, we had to reduce the number of labs and collection centers simply because the staff wasn't available or the demand wasn't there. And we had to centralize more into fewer units. And customers were okay with that. So the question is, do we need to reopen everything again, or can we continue to work on a slightly leaner basis moving forward as well? And I think there's some good traction that we can make there as well. So every crisis has unfortunately, when it happens, but has some benefits that it makes a lot of things fluid again. And we have seen that with customer relations, government relations, internal discussions. So I think this crisis will offer the sector and our company a lot of opportunities.
Right. Okay. So a real shift in how the public sector sees the private sector.
Yeah, we had in some countries good government contacts, but as I shared earlier in the call, we now have on a regular basis in most of our countries direct access to the Minister of Healthcare or even the Prime Minister. And we have never had that kind of exposure before, and clearly we are very eager to continue that dialogue, discussion, and relationship that is being formed during the crisis.
Yes, yes. And is that your experience too, Wolf, when it comes to?
Absolutely, absolutely. For me, the key word here is the learning curve. It is amazing to see how political decision makers, healthcare decision, I mean, they were overwhelmed. In the beginning, everybody was kind of belittling the whole thing. Oh yeah, this is happening in China. And then when the first cases arrived in Europe, yeah, we can isolate that. And then it became an exponential development. And then they got scared. And still they say, no, don't worry. We've heard that in January and February a lot. But then the month of March, people started to realize, oh my God, something very big is coming. And then all these pictures from Spain and Italy, people got scared. And I'm sitting on the board of our industry association, the laboratory physicians, and we could clearly tell that the thinking in the public institutions, the government, the Ministry of Health, the Chancellor of Germany, Ms. Merkel, and everybody, they suddenly started to realize the only chance we need to align and collaborate with the private sector. Remember, traditionally in Germany, the public institutions not necessarily embrace private competition or not necessarily open their arms to private-public partnerships. But in this crisis, there was no other way to do that. And my feeling at this point is there's a much better mutual understanding. The learning curve on both sides has been tremendous, and hopefully we can make this a bit more sustainable and have better discussions on the necessary investments, reshaping the healthcare budgets more to public matters, and I firmly believe that this crisis has been extremely helpful in creating the sense of mutual benefit once we engage in this kind of discussion. So my experience is pretty much what Joost has described from his geographies.
Yes, and Peter, I know you've just done this work with Luxembourg. Luxembourg historically has had extraordinarily expensive tests, hasn't it? They sort of.
Yeah, but we're down to the order of magnitude of the surrounding countries by now.
Oh, really?
So
it used to be 5 or 6 times more expensive than Germany, I seem to remember.
That you know more than me. I only know that we're in the same range as we are for let's say the other countries. I wanted to add a point to the role of the industry in this kind of public-private thing, and I think that's actually a very positive role that I've seen over the past weeks. That is let's say the management precision, and also the I'm lacking the right word, but the let's say the business judgment approach gives industry a role in helping politicians navigate the crisis. What do I mean by that? The other voices they often hear are very polar. So you have very binary associations that will shout to open, otherwise everybody goes bankrupt. Then they have these national institutes, or the virologists, the now famous virologists, that take very much scientific standpoint in saying we can't do this kind of test because it's not safe. I mean, they're very much on the if it's not 100%, then I don't do it type of recommendation. Whereas in industry we'd be used to 80-20, which in the world of infections actually solves a lot of the issues. So I think I've gotten a lot of appreciation from politicians and administrators in saying, well, of course I can't fix everything for you, but maybe I'm the first one to talk to you about hey, with this, we can reduce the risk by X percentage, and that may help a good share of the problem. So you don't have to wait for the perfect scientific answer that your National Institute of Virology might look for. And you also don't have to just open like your whatever tourism industry is asking for. And I think there's a almost a role in the middle for industry to advise on pragmatic approaches to the crisis.
So pragmatic advice. Gosh. Are you experiencing that too, Jos? You sort of find that you're able to kind of go in there and be listened to as a pragmatic voice, as opposed to maybe the more academic medical profession, which has historically dominated the debate?
Yeah, I think people do see that we're very practical, agile, and that we can quickly help with our also purchasing power. Having a presence in about 20 countries, we can get access to spare capacity, probably better than a local lab, and it's also more efficient to have massive testing done by bigger groups because you only need to do the dry run once, the quality checks once, versus spreading out your volumes over a lot of smaller unities. So people do see that benefit and are typically surprised about how quickly we can make things happen. Well, we also have to recognize the great power of the public side in terms of the quality, the depth of knowledge, the careful steps they take to ensure that all the testing is done in the right way. So that's what I meant, I think, before, Max, by having both sides combined. I think there's a better mutual appreciation moving forward.
Okay. There is a question here about consolidation and whether we will, from Tim Knips at COMED, about whether or not you will see more consolidation. To which I think the answer is yes, isn't it? I mean, unconditional.
I think we have talked a bit about it. We do see that potentially elderly owners or those companies with succession planning problems, first or second generation, have been scared a bit by the crisis and probably want to talk at some point in time. Realizing that benefiting from this crisis, being part of a big group and benefiting from the crisis sounds bad, but being in a relatively better position in a crisis, it's probably better to be part of a bigger organization. But I guess, Wolf, you see the same in Germany and Belgium.
I completely agree. I completely agree to what you just said regarding the thinking of owners, thinking about the generation change, but also realizing now, and I think the COVID crisis has demonstrated that, you need to act very rapidly to ramp up your capabilities, change your testing profiles. You need to invest. You also need to be able to communicate. I mean, we had a massive crisis in March and early April when it comes to supplies for all these PCR processes. We had lots of test kits, material, plastics, everything you need to perform that. You needed to be able to talk to Roche at the highest level to channel material into your lab group, and smaller groups and individual owners just couldn't do that. They just could not keep the pace of the development. Of course, not everything that turns out to be a pandemic. I understand that. But I think the experience in the COVID crisis has accelerated the thinking in many, let's say, family-owned businesses. They realize what a cash crunch is. They realized what it needs, what it takes to have working capital tripled overnight, and all of that. So we'll see some interesting developments in recent months, and going into 2021. We have been approached by a number of very interesting groups, but again, the Ametis group is highly specialized and diversified at the same time. We run one of the largest IVF organizations in Germany, so that makes us an interesting partner to talk to. We're strong in genetics, we're strong in cytology. So all of that has accelerated in recent months.
Okay, fine. Well, thanks very much, guys. We haven't answered all the questions, but I'm afraid we have effectively just ran out of time. So
maybe make a suggestion, Max. If there's important questions not answered, I would be happy to answer them or address them on a one-to-one basis. And you can provide my email address, or I can share it now if you like, as a follow-up on this. Or that have an interesting idea to share, don't hesitate to reach out. At least my email address is jos.lamers@unilabs.com, fairly straightforward. And I'm sure that both Peter and Wolf would appreciate the same.
Absolutely, absolutely. Agree 100%.
Set up,
Max, you may share this. Yeah.
enable
Absolutely.
have these questions answered by everyone. And that rather neatly actually takes me on to the final thing we wanted to cover today. So I'd like to just say thank you very much, panel, for your time and effort, because it does take time and effort to come into these kind of things, and I really appreciate it. And before we wrap up, I just wanted to bring in my Chief Executive, Julian Turner, because he's going to outline really what we're doing here at HBI with digital events and communities. So Julian, would you like to come up on stage? I can see he's coming. Look, there he is. His name has appeared as if by magic. And there he is. Hello, Julian.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good. Well, look, thank you again to the panel for a really interesting discussion. And actually, one of the things that I took from it is just how much innovation there is going on in this sector and across the whole industry at the moment. And we're trying to do our bit in that. That's what we're also have been thinking about. We've been thinking about what we can do in learning the lessons of what this pandemic has taught us about how we communicate and how we connect with each other, to think what we can do to improve our own offering. And we've been doing that in the context of HBI events. So we've got coming up, obviously we have our HBI 2020 event, and we've been thinking how we can improve that. So we've come up with a new concept, which we're calling HBI 365. And the idea is that we try to take the event from being just a 3-day event into being an all year round event. So we're going to be looking at the typical content that you enjoy in an HBI event, and more importantly, the networking that you get, and try and improve it. So we're going to run it all year round. That's the idea.
What does that mean?
Well, there are 4 parts to it. So the first part is that we're going to be doing things like this, things like you've been doing today. We'll be running big picture seminars, regular intervals on key topics, things that cut across sectors. But secondly, which I think is a really interesting idea, we're going to launch 6 HBI 365 communities. One of them in the labs and imaging sector. We'll also be doing one in hospitals, one in elderly care, one covering outpatient and elective, and then 2 communities will cover issues that are either cross-sector or involve people we thought maybe a more general interest. So workforce is one, and integrated health. And the idea is that these will be a continuing conversation. So just as you've found today, when you can't get through all of the questions at the same time, there are lots of burning issues. It'll be possible to continue the conversation beyond the meeting. So the idea is really we create a place for a continuous ongoing conversation in these spaces, and we'll moderate that and facilitate that. So those are the HBI 365 communities, and we'll spice them up along the way with roughly every quarter. We'll run an event similar to the one that we've enjoyed today, and after those events, we will be looking to break the group down into small workshops, small round tables, so people can really get to know each other a little bit better and share insights. That's what it's all about, really. We're trying to help people to share best practices, share insights, and therefore improve the value of their businesses. That's what it's all about.
Part of that, you've been looking a lot, haven't you, at networking platforms? Because I know that people are very skeptical that digital events can actually emulate the kind of networking that you can achieve at a physical face-to-face conference. And what we seem to be finding is that we think we can. Isn't that right, Julian?
Yeah, no, we do think we can, and this is a picture that is changing rapidly right now. Every week there's a different innovation to help us to connect a little bit better. But yeah, that's going to be absolutely the heart of it. We think that we'll be able to enable individual messaging across the whole group, and also enable people to connect one-to-one, set up one-to-one meetings as they wish. So that's going to be really important. We hope that we will have a new platform in time for our elderly care session, which is coming up at the end of June. I'll give you some dates on that in a moment. Then the third element of HBI 365 will continue to be the annual event. So this year we've obviously got the event in December, 14th to the 16th in London, and you'll be able to join that either in person, or you'll be able to join it digitally, because we'll be live streaming all of the main sessions of that event. And that also will be part of, we'll be promoting the networking possibilities of that. So networking is really going to be running at like a silver thread right through all of this, every aspect.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Julian. And here are the latest events we've got, and this entire series, and membership of HBI 365 will be free to people who have bought tickets to attend HBI 2020 in December in London. So I hope you'll join us at the new events we've got coming forwards. The first one of which is the Great Leap Forwards, to quote Mao Zedong. So I look forward to seeing you there, and thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it, and please fill in those online forms because we really need the feedback. Thank you very much. Goodbye.